Hey there! Tonight, we're leaving behind the shining heights of Olympus and stepping into the shadows, into the places where myths whisper rather than roar, where temples stand empty, marble eyes stare into eternity, and the air feels thick with something ancient and unspoken. This is the story of Medusa, once a woman of grace and devotion, later a creature of terror and legend. She was beauty turned against itself, punished for reasons the gods never cared to explain. Her hair became serpents, her gaze a curse, and yet, somewhere beneath it all, a quiet tragedy endured. Her story is not just about monsters, but about how the Greeks understood power, divine, cruel, and deeply human. It's about fear, transformation, and the uneasy line between the sacred and the damned. If this kind of storytelling helps you rest, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if it truly brings you peace. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. It's oddly comforting to know who else is out there, drifting off to the same story under different skies. So, dim the lights, let the stillness gather. Take a slow breath, and let's begin with the tale of Medusa. We turn our attention to one of the most misunderstood figures in all of Greek mythology, Medusa. A name that conjures up an image of snakes hissing, statues of terrified men, and the unfortunate feeling of turning to stone before you've even finished blinking. But, as with most things in ancient Greece, the story is a bit more complicated than that. You see, before Medusa became a monster, she was said to be breathtakingly beautiful, one of the loveliest mortals ever to walk the sunlit marble of archaic Greece. Her name, in the old tongue, meant guardian or protector. Rather ironic, considering how she ended up. But the Greeks loved irony almost as much as they loved olives and long speeches. According to the poet Hesiod, there were originally 3 Gorgons, Stheno, Euryale, and Medusa. The first 2 were immortal, but Medusa, the youngest, was not. That small detail would prove rather inconvenient. In the oldest versions, the Gorgons were monstrous from birth, winged creatures with bronze claws and serpentine hair. But later, particularly in Roman retellings, something changed. Ovid, ever the dramatist, reshaped Medusa's tale into something tragic, and perhaps a little too human. In Ovid's Metamorphoses, Medusa begins her life not as a beast, but as a priestess in the temple of Athena, goddess of wisdom, strategy, and, incidentally, rather bad tempers. The temple of Athena would have been an austere and beautiful place, white marble gleaming in the sun, the air thick with incense, and solemn chanting echoing through high columns. As a priestess, Medusa was bound by a vow of chastity, a rather inconvenient rule for anyone trying to live a normal social life in ancient Greece. But then came Poseidon, lord of the sea. In some versions he seduces her. In others he assaults her. The myths are deliberately vague, as if even the poets were a little uncomfortable with the scene. What we do know is that it took place in Athena's temple. And if there's one thing that never goes over well in myth, it's desecrating a goddess's sacred space. Athena, upon discovering this violation, reacts not with sympathy, but with fury, and, as gods often do, directs it at the wrong person. She curses Medusa, transforming her lovely hair into writhing serpents, and her face into something so dreadful that any mortal who looked upon it would turn instantly to stone. It's a classic example of divine overreaction, and of ancient theology's tendency to punish the powerless. Some historians suggest that this myth reveals more about Greek culture than about divine justice. In early Greek society, temples were spaces of feminine sanctity, places where mortal women could approach the divine without male interference. The violation of such a space wasn't just scandalous, it was symbolic. Athena's punishment, then, might reflect an older story, one in which the priestess herself becomes sacred, set apart, untouchable, terrifying. A kind of holy isolation. Of course, the ancient Greeks didn't write psychological thrillers, so the story was told simply as a punishment. But there's something hauntingly human in it. The transformation of beauty into fear, of innocence into isolation. Even today, Medusa's story feels like a whisper from the ancient world saying, "Beware how power judges the powerless." Now, while all this divine drama unfolded, artists and storytellers were busy turning Medusa's face into an artistic motif. By the 6th century BCE, her image began appearing on shields, armour, and temple pediments. To the Greeks, the Gorgon's head wasn't merely terrifying, it was protective. They believed that evil could be scared away by something even uglier than itself. A sort of ancient superstition that continues today whenever someone hangs up a particularly ghastly family portrait. This concept of using a terrifying image for protection is known as apotropaic magic, from the Greek word meaning to turn away. The Gorgoneion, or head of Medusa, was stamped onto coins, carved into doorways, and painted onto pottery. You could say she became ancient Greece's most popular security system. Even Alexander the Great's armour was said to have borne the Gorgon's face on its breastplate, though one suspects the snakes were considerably less wiggly by then. Yet behind the iconography lies a deeper theme. The Greeks, for all their love of beauty, were acutely aware of its dangers. A woman too beautiful could cause wars, topple kingdoms, or provoke divine envy. Just ask Helen of Troy. Medusa's punishment, then, could be read as the ultimate warning. That beauty, once envied or defiled, becomes its opposite, a curse. And this wasn't a new idea. Greek religion was full of transformations that punished human excellence. Arachne, turned into a spider for weaving too well. Niobe, frozen in stone for her pride. The ancient Greeks had an uneasy relationship with human potential. They admired it, but feared it would draw divine jealousy. Medusa's story is simply another reminder that in the eyes of the gods, mortals should never shine too brightly. Still, there's something profoundly unfair in her fate. Even the ancients sensed it. Some later philosophers reinterpreted the myth to make sense of it morally. For example, the philosopher Pherecydes suggested that the snake symbolized wisdom and divine knowledge, that Medusa wasn't monstrous, but enlightened, and that her deadly gaze represented the unbearable truth of seeing the world as it really is. It's quite a stretch, but philosophers have been doing that sort of thing ever since. Others saw her as a symbol of nature's power, beautiful, deadly, untamed. In that sense, Medusa wasn't cursed, she was liberated. She no longer belonged to the world of men or gods, but to something older and wilder, the realm of chaos and creation that existed before Olympus. When her eyes turned men to stone, it wasn't just death. It was stasis, the stillness of eternity itself. Meanwhile, ordinary Greeks went on living their lives, occasionally carving her head into temple gates or wearing it as a pendant, never fully realizing that the thing they feared most was also meant to protect them. There's a curious comfort in that, the idea that terror properly harnessed, becomes safety. And so, in the quiet centuries between myth and memory, Medusa's image spread. From vases to statues, from superstition to symbol. By the time the classical period arrived, she was no longer merely a cursed woman, but an emblem of power itself. Even Athena, her supposed tormentor, adopted the Gorgon's head on her shield, as if to admit that the strength she had punished now served her. It's almost poetic, really. The goddess who cursed the victim now wears her likeness in battle. The victim becomes the protector. The monster becomes the warning. The story circles back on itself, as myths often do, and we're left wondering who, in the end, truly held the power. And that's the quiet brilliance of the Medusa myth. Beneath the snakes and statues lies something universal. A story about how beauty, power, and punishment are woven together in human imagination. So as the night deepens and the gods withdraw to their starry thrones, imagine her not as the monster she became, but as she was before it all began, a young woman in a white temple, her hair gleaming like sunlight on the sea, unaware that she was about to become immortal in the strangest way possible. Because that's how Greek myths work. They begin as whispers of beauty, twist through tragedy, and end as symbols carved in stone, both literally and figuratively. And somewhere, in the silence of history, Medusa still waits, part goddess, part ghost. Her story turning softly in the dark like one of her sleeping serpents. If chapter 1 was about how beauty became a curse, chapter 2 is about how a curse became a quest. Because no Greek myth is complete until a hero turns up to make things worse. Enter Perseus, a demigod, son of Zeus and the mortal princess Danae. His father, being Zeus, of course, did not visit by ordinary means. According to legend, he appeared to Danae in the form of a golden shower that slipped through the roof of her bronze chamber. The ancient poets said this without the faintest hint of irony. One suspects they didn't have to clean the floor afterward. Perseus was raised in exile, on a small island under the watchful eye of a kindly fisherman named Dictys. All went fairly well until Dictys's brother, the king, a man named Polydectes, decided he rather fancied Danae. Perseus, being a dutiful son, objected. Kings, being kings, didn't like objections. So Polydectes devised a clever little trap. He announced that every man in his court must bring him a wedding gift fit for the wife of a king. Perseus, who owned roughly one sword and a pair of sandals, boasted that he would bring the king the head of Medusa herself. It was, as boasts go, a poor choice. But the gods, ever fond of chaos, decided to help. Hermes, the messenger god, appeared with his winged sandals. Athena, the very goddess who had once cursed Medusa, offered him a polished bronze shield, a mirror in which to look without looking. With these divine tools, Perseus set off into a world that, to the Greeks, lay at the edge of imagination. Now, when we say the edge of the world, we mean it quite literally. Ancient Greek geography placed the Gorgons somewhere far to the west, near the Oceanus, that great river thought to encircle the earth. To reach it, Perseus had to consult the Graeae, 3 elderly sisters who shared a single eye and a single tooth between them. One can only imagine how awkward family meals must have been. The encounter is one of the strangest in all mythology. Perseus, using the impeccable manners of a young man raised by fishermen, snatched their shared eye mid-conversation and refused to return it until they told him where to find the Gorgons. It's a classic hero tactic, a bit rude, but undeniably effective. The Greyer directed him to the nymphs, who kept the secret treasures, a curved sword called the harp, and the helmet of Hades, which granted invisibility. Armed with these improbable gifts, Perseus finally arrived at the home of the Gorgons. Picture the scene as the ancients did. A bleak shore beyond the limits of day, strewn with statues, men turned to stone mid-scream, birds frozen in flight, even waves caught halfway to the beach. The air itself must have felt heavy, the silence absolute. There, amid her immortal sisters, slept Medusa, the mortal one, the vulnerable one. Ancient art often shows her lying on her side, her serpents coiled loosely like sleeping cats. It is an oddly gentle image. And here we find one of the great paradoxes of myth. The hero's triumph begins with a moment of mercy. Perseus could not bear to see her directly. He used Athena's mirror-bright shield to watch her reflection, stepped carefully, and struck with a single blow. The act was swift. No prolonged battle, no heroic struggle, just one heartbeat, and the world changed. From Medusa's blood sprang two beings: Pegasus, the winged horse, symbol of freedom, and Creusa, a warrior whose name means golden sword. Even in death, she gave birth to new life. A small detail the poets always found deeply poetic, and modern listeners might find mildly confusing. Perseus placed the head in a special bag to contain its power and set off home, but Greek heroes were never allowed to travel without side quests. Along the way he encountered Atlas, the titan condemned to hold up the heavens. When Atlas refused him shelter, Perseus revealed the head, and Atlas instantly became a mountain. Some say that is why the Atlas Range in North Africa still stretches toward the sky, frozen in eternal effort. Later, Perseus came across Andromeda, a princess chained to a rock as an offering to a sea monster. It's the sort of thing that happened depressingly often in Greek mythology: royalty, hubris, and poor coastal management. Naturally, Perseus rescued her, married her, and flew off on Pegasus into the sunset. One must admit, it's quite the romantic turnaround for a man carrying a severed head in a sack. When he finally returned to Seriphos, he found King Polydectes still harassing his mother. This time there was no need for words. Perseus held up the Gorgon's head, and the king and his court turned to stone, a somewhat permanent solution to political problems. Afterward, he offered the head to Athena, who placed it upon her aegis, the protective shield that became her trademark in art and legend. And that might have been the end. A tidy myth about a brave hero, a wicked monster, and divine justice neatly restored. But the Greeks were rarely satisfied with tidy endings. They kept thinking about that head, about what it meant to look upon something so powerful that it froze you forever. In later centuries, the image of the Gorgon became a philosophical symbol. The Stoics saw it as the embodiment of unshakable calm, a face that could not be moved by fear or pity. The Neoplatonists, ever fond of allegory, claimed that the petrifying gaze represented ultimate truth, so brilliant that mortals, unable to comprehend it, froze in contemplation. A bit of intellectual gymnastics, perhaps, but rather elegant all the same. Artists, too, kept reinventing her. Archaic sculptures showed a grinning monster with tusks and wings, her tongue sticking out like a guardian lion. Classical sculptors softened her features, giving her the tragic beauty of a fallen goddess. By the time of the Roman Empire, Medusa had become almost fashionable, appearing on jewellery, floor mosaics, and even imperial armour. The emperors may have found something comforting in the idea of a head that silenced one's enemies merely by being displayed. Over the centuries, Medusa's story drifted far from Olympus. During the Renaissance, painters like Caravaggio and Cellini saw her as a symbol of mortal terror and divine punishment, a frozen moment of awe. In the 19th century, she was reimagined yet again, no longer a monster, but a victim. Feminist writers reclaimed her as a figure of resistance, a woman punished for her beauty and power. In some modern retellings, she is the hero, and Perseus the intruder. Myth, after all, has no fixed moral. It simply reflects the age that retells it. Still, the ancient essence remains. Medusa stands at the border between life and death, beauty and horror, mortal and divine. She reminds us that even monsters have beginnings, and that fear itself can be sacred. The Greeks, with a usual knack for poetry, managed to compress all of that into one image, a face, forever frozen, surrounded by serpents that hiss like time itself. So when you see her on a museum wall, on a cracked vase or a fading fresco, try not to think of her as a creature of nightmares. Think of her as the keeper of thresholds. She guards temples, shields heroes, and perhaps, in her quiet way, still protects the world from worse things. And if you ever find yourself walking through an empty gallery at night and your eyes meet a marble Gorgons, remember this: she only turns to stone those who look at her directly. Those who look with reflection, in art, in history, in imagination, are perfectly safe. So close your eyes and let the old myths fade into silence. The waves that bore Perseus have long gone still. The gods have drifted into sleep. And somewhere, beneath a layer of time and marble, Medusa rests. Neither monster nor maiden, but something far older. A memory carved in stone, waiting quietly for the dawn.